that coming out of an urban community and going into rural areas presented some really unique challenges, because a lot of rural areas didn't, there's that history of urban helpers coming in and saying, here, let us do this for you, as opposed to working with the existing organizations that were already on the ground and already had relationships.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending when you are connecting here. Pleasure to be back on. Today, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with a growing startup ecosystem that we had the pleasure to have met not too long ago. This is Startup Colorado. And so we are here with Brittany Romano, Executive Director, and Margaret Hedderman, Director of Content and Communication at Startup Colorado. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and sounded like Brittany is outside in a beautiful Colorado, but it's not snowing. It feels like it's unusually warm. Is that right?
That's right. I heard someone say it was July and January here in Colorado.
Where exactly are you now, Brittany?
I'm actually sitting about 45 minutes outside of Denver today.
Okay.
It's not unusual for us to travel to the Front Range, but it's part of our mission to make it so founders don't have to travel to the Denver, or it's our major metropolitan area, in order to do business at large.
Yeah. And I was hearing that Margaret went so far to France to follow your mission. But no, you want to say a couple of words of where you're at now, Margaret?
Yeah, sure. So I spent a long time in Durango, Colorado, which was in the southeast or southwest corner of the state. And the last couple of years, I've been living in rural France. So I experienced a very different type of startup ecosystem over here.
Sounds like the common denominator here is the rural part. So we're going to talk about this in a minute. But first of all, congratulations to you guys and Startup Colorado. It was amongst the awardees of the Startup Ecosystem Stars 2025. For the audience, this is an activity we've been running in collaboration with the International Chamber of Commerce, OECD, and the European Commission, actually, for quite some time. And really the idea is to identify growing startup ecosystems, in particular to award them and to share best practices in areas that we think are worth of recognition. And Startup Colorado is one of them. So congratulations. I think that's a testament of your work of the last few years, in particular, a few specific projects. And that's the kind of the core of the conversation we want to have today. So, let's start from the basics. You guys want to introduce real quick what is Startup Colorado, how is that structure, and maybe a little bit of the focus of rural entrepreneurship.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. So Startup Colorado was actually born out of a pretty uncomfortable observation. We were a program located at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and we were a big part of catalyzing the early tech innovation ecosystem in Boulder, but it also expanded down into the Denver area and at times even further south into Colorado Springs. But pretty quickly into the early days of our mission, we realized that if you don't live on the Front Range, your odds of success in terms of getting access to capital, mentorship, and being able to build a scalable growth pathway, the odds drop dramatically. And so despite the fact that rural Colorado is where a huge share of our state's innovation and natural resources, and not a huge percentage of our population, but a large percentage of our tourism populations where they live, the odds were low and just not favorable to them. And rural Colorado is kind of an anomaly in that it includes iconic and revered places such as Aspen, Telluride, Crested Butte, Breckenridge, Durango, Steamboat Springs, places that people... Go ahead.
We're just about to say all places that if you're a lover of skiing like myself, sound very familiar. But for international audience, That's a lot of ski resorts.
That's right. And so it's unusual that rural and desirable are seen from a global perspective as one and the same. And so we turned our attention to supporting the founders in the mountain towns and in the rural communities, to those folks who are building real businesses, employing their neighbors and friends, and solving local problems. And while at first they were invisible to the broader startup narrative, Colorado as a state was also really starting to invest resources in rural innovation. Innovation at large, but they were more inclusive of rural than most other states. With that said, most of the infrastructure didn't actually reach much of Colorodo's geography. And so we pivoted our mission to flip that model, so that instead of asking rural founders who want to build businesses or have already built businesses to have to come to the ecosystem, our mission was to build the ecosystem to wrap around them. And we do that through accelerator programs, access to capital, advisor networks, and just really robust partnerships that respect the pace, and the community. So that's really we're in almost our fourth year of becoming that connective tissue that is focused primarily solely on rural entrepreneurship.
And I'll add too that Brittany kind of talked about rural Colorado being unique in the sense that it's a desirable place to be an entrepreneur. And a big part of what sets rural Colorado apart from those other ecosystems, from other rural ecosystems, is this strong sense of identity and pride in building a business in the place that they call home. You know, these founders are intentionally launching businesses in these small communities that often have access issues to capital or infrastructure or other resources, not because they have to, but because they want to do it in a place that is not the urban Front Range. And that kind of collective bonding experience is starting to create its own momentum and bring energy into rural Colorado and attract interest in it as a viable place to start a business.
Awesome. And are you guys structured as a not-for-profit, I assume, 501c3 or membership based? What's the governance of Startup Colorado?
Yep, you got it. We're a nonprofit 501c3.
Okay. All right. Very good. So let's start from the basics. But first of all, I would say that I think Colorado is not new to startup economy in general. Between Denver and Boulder in particular, I think one of the way to mention that area is also Silicon Mountain. Techstars, for the audience that is more familiar with startup accelerators, Brett Feld, David Cohen, I think started in 2006, if I'm correct, the year before I started Mender Bridge here. So there's a history there of a pretty significant alternative ecosystem of entrepreneurs, of tech entrepreneurs. And we're going to draw this kind of comparison between the bubble that I live in and we live in here in Silicon Valley and the alternatives of different areas of entrepreneurship with some common denominators, but also with some clear differences. I would start from the definition of startup because I was reading on your website, what is a startup for you? Maybe you guys want to address that.
Margaret, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, it's the grammar question. So
yes.
At Startup Colorado, we say that startup is a verb and not a noun because it is the action of starting something up as opposed to the entity in and of itself. And for us, that helps make the action of starting a business and being an entrepreneur more relatable for these different communities, rural communities that might not necessarily see themselves instinctively as an entrepreneurship, because as you said, it's very much associated with these coastal cities and a very specific stereotype. But for us, we see startup as something that is an activity that anyone is capable of doing given the proper resources.
So that goes beyond, again, here when we talk about startup, the automatic association is a tech, enterprise is scalable, but you're wider. I think in the definition, you also, I think in your website, you said the Main Street retail shop too, would be in your range of members that you're serving. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to add just a thought to that. I mean, the way that we're approaching ecosystem development is to help paint a picture or steer the narrative that ecosystem development, entrepreneurship, and the startup community is a viable economic development strategy. More often than not, economic developers, or maybe we'll say not more often, maybe historically, they have a pretty narrow focus, and narrow, it's still a tremendous amount of work to find housing solutions and infrastructure solutions. So oftentimes entrepreneurship is kind of a peripheral thought or even a byproduct. And so our goal is to embed ecosystem development, entrepreneurial ecosystem, startup culture into economic development strategies at large, with the intent and with the knowledge that the gardening of the ecosystem, so being inclusive of your Main Street and lifestyle businesses, your tech and innovation startups, your staple legacy family run companies, like all of those have a place in the ecosystem. They all require very different support structures. We have identified there's really two main pathways. Like there's your small business and lifestyle Main Street. They follow a pretty similar trajectory. And the startup, even the tech startup, follows that same trajectory to a certain extent, really, as they start to identify their scalable solutions and maybe what their exit strategies is where, and I'm generalizing here, is kind of where the paths diverge. But so for the most part, in the early stages of ecosystem development and curating opportunities for folks, we can do a lot with similar strategies. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're hoping to demonstrate and help our statewide partners more thoroughly embed that kind of strategy into their long-term planning.
And those Main Street businesses are also they're essential to creating a desirable place to live that attracts founders of those scalable enterprises. And it's what makes a community desirable to be located in and to live in. It's what gives its unique culture and flavor. That's placemaking in and of itself.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about the genesis of the project. So is that a group of friends that got together? Maybe a little bit, also of your background. Why you, right? What brought you to that very place?
Yeah, I love this question. And Margaret, you've been around Startup Colorado in its original form longer than I have, but I'll take a stab at it and help me to fill in the blanks there.
Sure.
You brought up Brad Feld and David Cohen. You brought up Techstars and there was Foundry Group and Dan Caruso. A whole number of folks were, I don't want to say ironically, but serendipitously living in Boulder, Denver, about 15 years ago. And in addition to just this strong community of builders, the Obama administration at the time had partnered with Startup America, or they formed this new partnership called Startup America. And some of the folks from the Obama administration were tasked with going out and finding entrepreneurs that they could speak to. And I tried to identify how the government could further catalyze entrepreneurship. And so Startup America had relationships with Brad Feld and Attorney General Phil Weiser, our current Attorney General Phil Weiser, who was formerly the executive director at Silicon Flatirons, which was the law school at CU Boulder. They were approached by Startup America, and they were engaged in identifying how the government, how private partnerships could all come together to enhance, to start, to develop, to build the local startup ecosystem. And so Startup Colorado was born out of that dialogue. And that's where it was housed at CU Boulder at the Silicon Flatirons originally. And so, Margaret, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, a unique caveat is, so it was originally founded in 2011 at the Silicon Flatirons Center, and they focused pretty much primarily on urban front range startups. And then, as Brittany said, there was that imperative to expand and see if the Boulder thesis, that Startup Community Way, could be applied to these areas outside of those already existing startup ecosystems. And so that was in 2017. I think that it became a program within the University of Colorado. And that was interesting, because that's whenever I came on board, was in 2019. And working through the University of Colorado to essentially create our own mission and see how we could take this thesis to communities outside of the Front Range. And I think an interesting aspect of that is that coming out of an urban community and going into rural areas presented some really unique challenges, because a lot of rural areas didn't, there's that history of urban helpers coming in and saying, here, let us do this for you, as opposed to working with the existing organizations that were already on the ground and already had relationships. So that was really important to us from the very beginning, was to form those relationships and not be duplicative of efforts that were already happening in rural communities, and instead help them do their own programming and be that connective tissue between the Front Range and the resources available to what was missing on the ground.
Yeah, and that's a mission that resonates very much with us. One of the studies that we've been working on for quite some time shows that in most of the countries around the world, while the kind of entrepreneurship ecosystems are on the rise and gaining steam, it's highly concentrated around one capital, right? I mean, there's a big disproportionate fraction of what happens within one capital, right? If it's Paris, if it's London, if it's Seoul, if it's very much so. And so the other ecosystems tend to actually suffer from this imbalance, rather than enjoying, as waves of opportunities. So I think it's super important at the moment to be explicit in reaching out to alternatives of communities of entrepreneurship in areas that otherwise would not be served and would stay behind. And so if you see in the natural curve of the growth of ecosystem of innovation, there is, once you get a certain size, you start to accelerate at an exponential level, right? And that gap is actually growing over time rather than decreasing. So it's super important, I think, to have a mission to cover alternatives. And so Margaret, maybe we can go through a little bit of the insights, what you call the state of startups in Colorado, so particularly in the rural areas that you serve. So give us some examples, the size, and maybe also some stories that you think that might be interesting to share within your community that you serve.
Yeah, sure. And Brittany, I hope you'll jump in as well. We've hit on this a little bit already, but in rural Colorado, we have a really diverse collection of communities that are actively developing their own entrepreneurial ecosystems, both locally and regionally. And these communities have unique histories and cultures and their own unique challenges. But at the same time, they have very specific types of businesses that are being attracted to those communities or are naturally capable of being fostered there. So we're seeing a mix of businesses, industries of a variety of stages across the state take hold. And Brittany, I'm hoping you'll jump in and talk a little bit about the investment that's the attention of investors that's coming into rural.
Yeah, and I'll gladly do that. But before I do, I love this question because it allows us to further talk about that we often gravitate towards the resort communities, right? Colorado has such a strong identity around outdoor recreation and tourism, but Colorado also has a number of legacy industries, like telecom and agriculture and clean tech. And so outside of those rural resort communities, we are also seeing incredible innovation around agriculture and around clean water, clean energy. And that tends to live in rural because that's where the problem solution questions are most front and center. So I love to talk about those communities that have the diversity of industry, but then I'll also just draw a quick connection to a company being built in Summit County. So right in Silverthorne, right, kind of like Central Mountain part of the state, there is a notable AI company, Kamiwaza, that's been built, and they are focused on AI, autonomous AI, and building autonomous data centers for communities. So increasing security around AI and data. That company has been attracting investors from Silicon Valley, from both coasts, and so notable investments coming into rural Colorado from different kinds of investors into different kinds of companies, which is a good segue into one of the things we see as a major challenge, but also opportunity in supporting our ecosystem and building this connective tissue is focusing on the capital ecosystem. Colorado has notable destinations, like we've mentioned before, that attract wealth and talent from all over the globe. It's fairly well known that there's numerous New York City, Boston, and Silicon Valley investors that fly into Colorado monthly, if not more frequently than that, to visit their second homes. We've seen them start to make important and interesting investments of time, resources, money into our ecosystem. And so our hope is to further capitalize on their knowledge, on their experience, on the resources and the investments that they're interested in making in our Colorado ecosystem, in our Colorado companies. And just kind of jumping ahead a little bit here. I mean, this is where we're about to make our biggest bet. It's on the capital ecosystem. And we believe that Colorado has the opportunity to pioneer innovative and alternative finance that can really lend itself to expanding this rural entrepreneurial ecosystem.
And let's talk about the positive first, and then we can focus on the challenges and what's next. But on the positive side, again, drawing a comparison with the Silicon Valley of the world. But what's the one thing that Colorado you think does better that Silicon Valley that people still don't associate with Colorado or don't understand? What do you think?
Yeah, I think because this is what people tell us, that Colorado still remains extremely collaborative. Like, it's very easy to get meetings. It feels like you're always just 1 degree away from talking to the person or meeting the person you need. And what we've heard is that it's just a little bit more cutthroat, a little bit more competitive in other metropolitan areas and other states. So I think that's something we're really trying to foster as we're seeing a tremendous amount of new types of capital providers, and as venture capital is diversifying and changing and Colorado's becoming more interesting, we know we need to work hard to maintain that collaborative spirit.
How do you nurture that? I know you guys are on the road all the time. Let's see, buses or whatnot. So what you do to nurture that community that is dispersed? So you have the opposite issue, right? So how to connect those dots as the background here of our chat.
I think about that in a few different ways. The first, I'll give a nod to Brad Feld's Startup the Community Way. In his book, he explicitly calls out, you can't have gatekeepers, right? Like, everyone's always welcome to participate. Events are open to anybody. And we really take that seriously, that we don't have any desire to own programs or own the ecosystem. we want to continue to find partners and attract the resources and the people to strengthen that connective tissue. And so I think that's really important. The second part is the realization that we actually all have a similar goal in mind, and we share a similar customer, and that's the entrepreneur. And so we have a lot of self-awareness around when we can and when we can't help founders. And so therefore, we know that we need a robust partner community, so that in order for the initial contact or access point, we want to quickly get them to a solution and a partner that can help them, because as you all know, time is the killer of deals and opportunities. So I think just keeping that in mind, that we share the similar customer, we also often share the same problem. We just experience it differently. And so if we can acknowledge the founder as our customer, and we can acknowledge that we share a problem, we might have alternative ways of getting there, then generally speaking, we can uplift everybody, and more often than not find the most innovative solutions in collaboration with one another.
And I'll add that in practice, a lot of what we do in terms of events and networking opportunities for entrepreneurs around the state, we design them intentionally around being collaborative and having that spirit of sharing and giving first. For example, at West Slope Startup Week, which is modeled off of, a lot of those big startup weeks all around the world, we approach it as such a way is that everybody is there to both give their own services, as well as potentially receive something as well. And so it creates an environment that is naturally welcoming and naturally supportive, as opposed to, some event that you go to where you don't feel welcome, or you feel like everybody's out to get something for their own. And we believe that by creating those types of events, that then spreads throughout the rest of the ecosystem and in how people behave.
That leads me to two follow-up questions. One is let's share some numbers. How do you measure success, right? At the end of the year, I don't know if you have KPIs, but what do you measure? What is success for you in 2025?
Yeah, we do have a tremendous amount of KPIs. I mean, the ones that we might all share are founders completing programs, their total revenue growth, jobs created, like those traditional economic development initiatives. Now we're looking more into how prepared are our founders to take capital? How confident is the ecosystem? How much capacity did we create with our local partners? How much capital flows into rural regions, either in dollar amounts or just the total number of investor types that are coming into Colorado? As we build out our angel investment network, we're also looking at repeat investors, repeat investments, just kind of demonstrating that durability of our rural economy. I'm just thinking of we have, like I said, we have those traditional metrics, but I think also like reduced isolation, less need to travel to Denver to get customers or to find support services. I mean, some of the most important metrics we're looking at are just like entrepreneurship as viable. How many new business starts started in rural? There were 90,000 new businesses filed in rural Colorado in the last 5 years. And so we have a pretty good idea of where we're coming from, as well as where we need to go.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but is that number, is that growing, or what is the trend?
In rural, it's growing. And What's interesting too, that a lot of folks don't know, is that the length of those businesses staying open and staying viable is also growing. So it just demonstrates that entrepreneurship is a viable career path and a viable option for folks who don't otherwise have job opportunities where they're living currently.
Right. Sorry, interrupted you. There was another one, a last one that you had on your mental list.
Oh yeah, no, I think just broadly, just talent creation at large, and then when we're looking at KPIs, we try to do it from a very like a systems level approach. Like, are all these KPIs leading to stability? Are they leading to wealth generation? Are they leading to bigger, broader kind of like tidal wave activity that is helping to reverse maybe some of the negative trends that we've seen happening in rural in the past?
Yeah, I think changing the narrative of rural and rural founder is a big part of the work, and we can see that being done as well through media shares of rural businesses. And anytime a company is getting either statewide or national attention, that counts as a solid win, because that is a rural business that's getting that spotlight, as opposed to an urban business, which is often easier to find and interview and put that spotlight on.
And I guess that very part of challenge is on you, Margaret, right? As telling the narrative that people can relate to and understand. Connected to that, I mean, it feels like it's a very, ground up community building activity there. How do you sustain yourself? Is there membership base? Is there donation base? Is that sponsorship based from government institutions? What's the model?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. And that diversification is really important, especially in these kind of competitive fundraising landscapes. So yeah, and this kind of lends itself to a point I'd love to share with some listeners who are maybe working to build rural ecosystems. Sustainability beats scaling across the board, at every intersection. Focusing on sustainability and long-term viability of your ecosystem is the most important thing. And so we really try to focus less on programmatic intervention or one-time intervention and just those long-term systems level change. We're really fortunate to have some notable funders in Colorado who are, like I said, they're making big investments in rural, and our state government also is increasing the emphasis. So we have really strong funding partners at the state level. We have a mix of state and federal grants. We lean into our partners in private philanthropy, and we're also building revenue models that we can expand nationally and globally, we hope, in time. But yeah.
Might be the time, Margaret, maybe if you have your pitch to attract entrepreneurs that today are kind of the options of deciding where to move, where just to start their own business. What's a pitch for rural Colorado?
Yeah, well, it's I would say first and foremost, there's the quality of life that rural Colorado presents, whether that's in the mountains or out on the eastern plains. It's a great place to live and have a family. But on top of that, there is this growing supportive ecosystem for rural entrepreneurs that is making it a great place to start a business.
And a very collaborative community, as you said, exactly, with a sense of community that's somewhat in the urban areas is harder to get. I would end this interesting conversation in looking into the future. So fast forwarding to the next 5-10 years, 2030 and beyond, what will Colorado be world famous for? What's the boldest bet that you think that a Colorado startup community should make?
I think that if we get this right by, let's say, 2030, people are not going to be talking about rural versus urban innovation anymore. They'll just talk about Colorado as a place where you can build a meaningful company, where you can live a really great life, and also you can contribute to your community, whether that's through business or personally. And you can do that no matter your zip code. And that's really the future that we're all working towards at Startup Colorado.
Yeah, and I see that scaling beyond Colorado as Colorado becomes more known as a entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a lot of states as well as other countries that can look to how Colorado has bridged that rural urban divide and created a cohesive ecosystem, and maybe be inspired to do it themselves.
Hey, for 2026, is there any specific date that people should pay attention to, events or gathering, things that you guys are working on, so that the audience or the travelers to Colorado, they can pick a date, can decide?
West Slope Startup Week, of course.
Exactly. October 5 to 9 in Durango.
Durango, it is October 5 to 9. All right. Margaret, Brittany, thank you so much. Beautiful to see those community thriving, and thanks for all you're doing. All the best, and hope to be in touch soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.